Right. Welcome everyone to Agile Austin's Agile at Scale meetup. So just a little bit background about us. Again, my computer is going to lag on this PowerPoint one for whatever reason. So Agile Austin, the slide's not there, but there we are, and it's going to jump. I thought it would do that to me. Our mission is to connect people and foster professional growth through collaborative events and educate our community on uncovering better ways to deliver value through the Agile values, principles, and practices. So we're here to learn and grow together. Our board members for 22, 23, Max, Lee, Scott, Ben, and Angela, and Ben's also here with us. He's one of the co-hosts of this one. And so we thank our board members. They do a lot of things behind the scenes, a lot of getting together to make sure we're running efficiently and effectively toward that mission. We do want to thank our sponsors. We have Agile Velocity, and we had the Ed Malora coaching as our two sponsors, our platinum and silver sponsors. We want to thank them. Without them, we're not able to do a lot of these events. We're not able to, they're helping us with the tools and technology we need to be able to do these kind of events. Many ways you can get involved as members. You can help become a sponsor. We have various members of sponsorship level, or you can become a member. Member fees are yearly $35. It's not very expensive, but it gives you access to Slack, the member portal. You're able to vote for board members or even become a board member. And then sometimes there's special events and training discounts that may happen. So join today. It's agileaustin.org is the site to go, and for $35 you can join. All right, we have different meetups. This one is the top middle one, the Agile at Scale. And so we're here to really discuss about applying when scaling Agile across organization, and how for large companies are able to do things that were meant for small, but do it in the large. So I'm Leland Newsome. Ben is also here. He's my co-host. And so we meet the third Friday of each month over, from noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. I know we have a lot of people who are not in Central or in the Austin area that join us on these remote ones. But we are I'm hoping to do more hybrid events into next year. We have other ones. We have the Agile Coaching, which meets the first Monday of each month. I think that one's in the evenings on the Monday. We have the book club that meets the first and third Thursdays in the evenings. We have the Leaders SIG. Max runs that one. It meets the first Friday of every month over the same lunch hour. Lean Kanban meet the second Friday of the month, also over the Austin lunch hour. And then we have the Scrum Master one, which meets the every third Monday at noon. And so, multiple meetups that you can attend, build the community, learn and grow from each other. We also have the Keep Austin Agile Conference, Keep Austin Agile 2024. I believe it's the 11th one or something like that coming up. It's going to be March 7th. And so great conference to go to. Great, it's going to be a hybrid one, so you will be able to go in person for those in the Austin area or willing to travel to Austin. It's right at the start of South by Southwest as well, so you could come here for Keep Austin Agile and stay for South by Southwest if interested. So it's a great conference to go to. Everyone gets together, a great community to get together and work through the conference. I believe tickets are on sale already. I believe they're still discounted tickets for early bird. So if you're interested, might check that out soon and get a discount on the tickets. I think they're still, Ben, are they still still accepting speakers? If anyone's wanting to speak, can they submit their information in?
Yes, through October 31st.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Cool. So if you're interested in speaking, great time and great reminder for myself to finish the one that I was working on. So again, we're at Agile at Scale. Our goal, it's really about that learning and growing. Been doing this SIG since 2016. Ben joined in 2020. So we're both passionate about these topics. We really want the community to continue to learn and grow together. It's great sharing information and sharing knowledge. And so that's the purpose why we're here and why we continue to do this. Upcoming events, November, we have Artificial Intelligence for Agilists. Are you ready? Scott Ambler will be the one presenting that one. We've should be a great topic. It's at least very timely for me personally. So something that, you know, the artificial intelligence is something, you know, a lot of talk around right now. December, because we're the third Friday of each month, it usually gets real close to the holidays and people already taking off and taking breaks. So we tend to skip that one. We'll take the holiday break in December, and then we'll come back to that third Friday in January, working through some speakers right now. So far, my speakers have agreed to February and March. So I've already got people lined up into next year, but January is still one I'm working through. So if you have anyone that would be willing to speak, send them my way and we'll talk to them about that one as well. But today we have Colleen Johnson here to walk us through 3 easy steps to simplify your scaling. So Colleen's a transformation coach with Agile Velocity and the CEO of prokanban.org. And so it's an inclusive Kanban community. They have great training. They have great webinars out there, great information, free books. In fact, I just referred someone to the Flow Metrics for Scrum Teams book, sent them that link about an hour ago. So it's a site that I actually use a lot as well. She's active with Agile Denver, and so does a lot in the Agile community. So would like to thank Colleen for taking time and coming here to speak for us, and for all of you for coming here to actually join and ask questions and go. Colleen, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. But for questions, do you prefer them to wait till the end, put it in chat, and maybe then I find a good break and do it, or just come off mute and...
Yeah, I would love to not just talk at you guys for an hour. So the more conversations we can have real time, let's do that. I think that makes it more beneficial for all of us, and hopefully make sure that nobody falls asleep listening to me drone on. So I would say post them in and yell at me. I'm going to share my screen here, so it might make it hard for me to see both the chat, but yeah, feel free to interrupt me.
I'll pay attention to chat for you.
Okay,
so,
great.
Okay.
All right. All right. So I want to talk today about scaling. And my name for this was 3 easy steps to simplify scaling. You'll have to tell me at the end if these sound easy. As I was working on my content here and thinking about what I wanted to talk through with you all today, I was like, maybe these aren't so easy after all. I think they're easy, but maybe they're not that easy. So we'll get into this. Like I said, please raise your hand, jump in, ask questions as we go through this. I think we've got a nice small group here, so we can make this more of a conversation and less of me just talking for the whole hour. My goal for today is to challenge us to think about scaling a little differently, to think about what we're here to do, what's our goal, and how might we be able to do that in a more efficient way. I think, we've probably all had different exposure to different scaling frameworks and different approaches to scaling, I think, and there's good things and bad things that come out of all of these, right? So my goal today is to think about how can we make this simpler and more rooted in the original goals we had when we started trying to scale our Agile practices. But I want to challenge everybody to think outside the box a little bit. And even if you just leave today questioning some of the things that we've done in the past, I think that's a win. So that's my goal for me, for you, for all of us today. So I want to start off with, why do we typically scale? Why are we scaling practices in the first place? Feel free to come off mute. I'd love to hear where you're at or what you've seen in the past. What are some of the typical reasons you hear why an organization may embark on trying to scale Agile?
I would say,
go ahead, Jenny.
A bunch of teams working independently on their own priorities and such could be kind of just have the same issues that a bunch of individuals working independently might have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Different priorities, maybe issues coordinating collaborating, delivering together. Okay. What else?
I think to get business involved, because the biggest problem that we have, and you see it in SAFE, and you see it in a lot of other scaling areas where they need to understand that Agile is not something just for IT. It's actually a new way of working. And basically having IT and business work together, but in a way that business can really provide. Right, information and everything and guidance instead of that old functional document that they'd write up for months and then throw over the transom and say, it's your problem now, don't bother us.
Yeah.
So it's a new way of working. But one of the things that I also see is they do the Big Bang Theory. And the bottom line is that fails. And I can tell you that based on some recent information, only 28% of digital transformations are successful. 27 fail. But the real danger here is that 50 some odd percent that are still challenged. And essentially that equates to spending a lot of money and not making any headway.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because I think a lot of the things that we do try to put in practice can be very expensive. I tried to run some numbers here. I'll share with you in a few moments, but let's talk about, so you guys are rattling some of these things off here, right? That our goal here in business agility is to achieve some of these different things. And Jenny, you talked about coordination, right? And that kind of translates a little bit here to improved efficiency, but I tried to distill this down. This is not like a published finite list of the reasons people try to scale. It was really just the things that came to mind for me. So the things I hear the most are improved efficiency across the whole organization. And that can be team level, program level, coordination between IT and business, like you said, Jim, faster time to market. And that should be a T, not marker. So faster time to market. So things like how are we getting things into our customer hands sooner, right? So that hopefully translates to high quality, happy customers. From a business perspective, a big part of this is often reduced risk and how can we identify and mitigate risks sooner in the process. Organizational alignment. And when I think of alignment here, one of the things I see a lot in our industry is that a lot of organizations spend a lot of time and money coming up with great strategy, right? What's our BHAG? What's our vision? Who do we want to be when we grow up? And then the next day, there's 20 requests in every team's queue that are related to firefighting and have nothing to do with moving the needle on those big ticket things. And so a lot of our scaling practices really try to help us connect the work that we do every day up to those things that matter to the business so that we can see that needle move. And the last one I hear frequently is transparency and visibility. I think and this kind of goes there with organizational alignment that we can't see a lot of things, right? So the teams are busy, everybody's busy, everyone's running around like a chicken with its head cut off, but we're not able to see the cracks in the system. We're not able to see progress. We're not able to see the feedback coming in or where work might be stuck. And so our goal with a lot of these practices is to try to gain better transparency and visibility across the business. So I think those are my things that I typically see, but what does this mean in practice? So I think when we start to think about how we scale Agile practices, there's a few things that stand out to me in the things that we do, right? The first thing I think of is the work items, right? How do we connect all of our work across this business at different levels of the organization and break that work down? And whether it's epic feature story or initiatives, whatever you want to call them, right? We're trying to create that alignment between all of the work items that are moving across either different teams or different functions within our business. This translates to strategy, right? So back to that alignment. If we know these are the things that we want to do as a business, are we making sure that the work that we're delivering ladders back up to those strategic themes or OKRs or BHAG, if you use that term, right? But so what are we trying to do here? Back to Jenny's comment around collaboration, I think a lot of scaling Agile practices has to do with coordination of effort. So alignment of things like Scrum of Scrums or portfolio syncs or different meetings where we're saying, what are we trying to work on? What are we trying to get done here? So it's really creating some structure and transparency into the coordination of those different activities that help us deliver. And then the last one is planning, right? So what are we doing upfront to make sure that we're thinking about risks, dependencies? How are we identifying those things, trying to come up with mitigation strategies sooner in the process so those things don't derail us when we start to work? So these are the things I think we typically see. There's obviously others, and it depends a little bit on the flavor that you're using to scale your Agile practices, but these are kind of the groupings I see as the things that we are typically trying to scale in the business to help us achieve those items that were on the slide before. But what typically happens? So that's our goal. That's what we're trying to do. We start to scale all these Agile practices. But I think that there's some unintended consequences of all of this, right? The first is complexity. And this complexity, I think, is often met with a lot of resistance because there's so much to change. And SAFe, I'll use SAFe as the example quite a bit here, but there's new roles, new practices, new taxonomy, all these things that require expensive training, and even maybe more expensive unlearning the way that we've done these things in the past. And so that complexity, that resistance to change makes it hard for us to often make progress getting these things implemented. The next thing I see as a pain point for adopting scaled practices is that it is a lot of overhead. I tried to run, let me see if I can find these for you here. I tried to run some numbers just to try to figure out, and if anybody else has done this more accurately, I'd love to hear. I was just trying to see, what does a typical 2-day PI planning event cost for an organization? Let's say, we're looking at 150 people in the PI planning event for 2 days, and that we are figuring the salaries there range from maybe 150 to 200 all out for the business, including benefits and everything like that. I think you'd be looking at least over $1 million for 4 PI planning events a year for the cost of those, just the salaries, right? Not even the time cost. Yeah, Randy.
Yeah, I know at Nike that was like Nicholas said 10K. 10K was the catering bill.
Yeah. Yeah. And now we're all traveling often for these events. So we're going on site. So there's one way to look at, to look at the overhead there. But then there's also there's a cost overhead associated in some of these approaches. There's also the overhead of all the things that happen before we ever get in those rooms to plan, right? We have to define all the work and review all the work and estimate all the work. And I don't know if you heard me say do any of the work, but I didn't. So all that we're doing is focusing on planning, estimating, and trying to figure out what we're going to work on instead of actually delivering things, which feels like it might in the end be more valuable. So there's a lot of overhead associated with a lot of these scaling practices and cost. And then the last one is rigidity. I hear this a lot from, I think in our industry, we talk a lot about how all of these things are supposed to be a template, right? Scrum is, SAFe is, like, it's a place to start and then adapt from there. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. However, I don't think most organizations implement things that way. They implement them like a playbook, and even down to the exit policies on your feature level board, right? I haven't seen many organizations adapt those much. They take them right off the SAFe website, even though it says on that picture that these are an example exit policies for your feature Kanban. And so I think a lot of this rigid structure tends to stifle a lot of the things that we're trying to drive to from an Agile perspective. We see less flexibility in how we're planning and how we're delivering, and even less flexibility in our decision-making about what to work on next, because we've created all this structure that requires a lot of approvals to move things forward. So what do we do? What do we do? I think the first thing we need to stop doing is planning. And I know that probably sounds batshit crazy. But when we talk about planning and all of that, all of those things we just talked about around estimating and forecasting and breaking the work down, it's all built around a very high degree of precision and accuracy that we don't have when we're planning work a quarter out, right? And that we shouldn't have. So I want to talk a little bit about what we could be doing differently instead of planning, to start to think about pulling work in when we have the capacity to do the work. So a pull system, right? Instead of planning out work and shoving it in when nothing's coming out the other side, how do we pull just in time, on demand, and create that structure inside of our organization where we're pulling instead of planning? So the first thing here is thinking about how this can help us embrace change, right? So if change is our goal and flexibility is our goal, when we start to think about moving away from planning, we want to help enable the organization to be more receptive, right? We want to be able to adjust to new things coming in. A lot of times when we go into planning, we're looking at a quarterly based type of planning event where we're trying to forecast what we're going to deliver a quarter out. A lot of times the last quarter's work isn't done yet. And so we're pulling things in that may not even be delivered for a half a year or more away. And so this planning locks us in. It locks us in and makes it like we're committing to something that we don't know if it will even still be valuable by the time we get it out the door. So planning just in time and pulling based off of capacity allows us to be a little more receptive to what's going on in the industry and in the market so that we can pull the highest priority item when we have the capacity to do the work. This also helps us be more responsive, right? So if one of our goals is giving our customers what they want when they want it, planning on demand and pulling work in when we have capacity gives us the ability to pivot more easily to what the customers need and what they expect. And I think, we've seen a lot of examples of this over COVID where things have changed quickly and we have to be able to respond to something completely different than maybe what we thought we were going to be doing a few months ago. So that notion of pulling the next highest priority when we have capacity allows us to help the teams pivot more easily to what's important for us to focus on. And the next one here is helping to reduce some of the bureaucracy, right? So planning, these cycles of planning that we go through also, I would say lead to like a false sense of security, a false sense of just plan in general, right? I joke all the time that like we fly a lot in this industry and we're at the airport a lot. And I call my husband all the time from the airport and I'm like, my flight's delayed. I'm so flustered. It's screwing everything up. And he's like, I don't know why you still get so frazzled by this. Like you fly all the time and it's never on time. And I was thinking about this recently, and I think it's because I, in my head, have a plan, right? I'm like, I'm going to get to the airport at this time, and I'm going to land at this time, and I'm going to go get some dinner, and then I'm going to go to bed at this time. So I'm ready for PI planning the next day, for example. And then the minute that flight's late, I'm like, okay, now what do I have to do? Now I'm not going to get to my room until midnight. Nothing's going to be open, and I'm starving, and so my plan's gone awry, and really, more importantly, my control is gone. And so when we start to think about that, when we plan all of this stuff up front through these different processes, we're also creating a little bit of that false sense of control that all these things are going to go to plan. And the minute they start falling apart, or the minute something higher priority or more important comes up, we have to go then back through all of these new planning efforts to get approvals to make changes because we gave them a sense of control of understanding what was going to happen that we really didn't have. So how do we start to chip away at this? So this concept of pull, and if you've worked in a Kanban system before, is really created by implementing WIP limits. And that is not just WIP limits for engineering, right? So as we start to scale our practices, I tend to see organizations build their entire system around the capacity of engineering. I get it, engineering is expensive, engineering's slow. That's usually where we focus all of our time and money first. But you also have all these other parts of this system that are also capacity constrained parts of the business, like discovery, design, right? Even marketing. So if marketing has a constraint around how many things that they can bring to customers and bring to market, that needs to translate to WIP limits for everything else in your system before that. And so WIP limits help us create pull. I do, as Leland said at the beginning, I do a lot of Kanban training and coaching. I'm very passionate about Kanban. And I hear a lot of organizations ask, like, what's the best thing we could do to start? And I think putting WIP limits in at your highest level of work will give you the most bang for your buck, because that focus starts to trickle down to other parts of the business. So even at a team level, if we have WIP limits and our team actually follows them and we're doing everything by the book, I could still be working across 20 different features inside of the WIP limits at my team level board. That's not going to help me deliver. It's not going to help me strategically. It's spreading our focus as a team across a bunch of different work. And so starting with WIP limits at the highest level of your business will help create that pull. It'll show you where you have capacity to start doing new planning, right? If we haven't delivered anything, we don't need to do any planning. And it helps us figure out, as capacity opens up, where do we want to focus our energy as a business next? So that's our first one, pull over plan. I'll pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions before we go to number 2.
I have one question about the WIP limits on especially the work upstream as it's coming. Do you ever put in minimum WIP limits?
I have in the past for things like discovery. Yeah, and like a discovery Kanban, because a lot of times you want to make sure that you have enough work to make sure the teams don't run out of work to do, right? So if you've got like a discovery funnel or product definition stages in your workflow before it comes to the engineering stage or the build it stage of your workflow, you might say we have to have 2 features that are always in some form of definition, and no more than 5, so that we have enough work for our teams to pull something that's available. So I have used minimums there. Also, just on your to-do column, I think minimums can be helpful. So, when you think of, I'm a big fan of trashing your backlog. I think it's a waste of time and space and energy. So if you just think of your backlog as things you might do at some point, maybe never, then your to-do column could also run in that same kind of structure, where you could say we have a minimum of 2 things prioritized, but no more than 4, for example. And that could be features. So your to-do column of what is prioritized or budgeted and planned to pull in, a minimum there might be necessary too. But the max WIP limit is going to help you create that pull structure in terms of deciding what to work on next. In general, I think when you look at WIP limits, it helps create more focus in decision making across that whole pipeline too, because when we have a ton of things to pick from and a ton of things to talk about and a ton of things to give status on, right, we're spreading all of our energy and focus across all of those different items that are in progress, where when we start to reduce our WIP too, it helps us with decision fatigue. It helps us narrow the focus of our conversations and efforts across the business. Did that help, Leland?
Yes, it did.
All right. Number 2. No, I know no one from Agile Velocity is going to be surprised to see me say this. And this slide's particularly, I think, for Jenny. Stop estimating, for the love of God. So let's talk about estimating. This, I think, goes back to that false sense of control, false sense of hope, both. Think about what goes into estimating, right? So we'll pick on story pointing. I think it's an easy one to pick on, and I know not everyone is attached to story pointing anymore. So even if you're estimating in hours, think about what goes into that, right? We require upfront design, very thorough definition. I don't know if you facilitated a session with developers trying to provide estimates, but they have a lot of questions because they want to be right, because they're scared if they give you a number, they're going to be held to it. So there's this like hamster wheel that we're constantly on of, this requires so much upfront information so that we can be really highly accurate in something we know that probably won't be anyway. And it creates a lot of fear. creates a lot of mistrust, I think, right? People don't want to give a date. People don't trust the dates. And then it translates into kind of these anti-pattern practices of things like, well, we'll pad it. You said this would take us 6 months, but we're going to add 30% because we're roughly always wrong by 30%. I'm like, where do we come up with all these bad patterns, right? Because we know our estimates just aren't really accurate. So how do we start to move away from estimates? I'm a big fan of probabilistic forecasting, and it's really just using your past throughput data to come up with a projection for how much work you can get done, or how much work you can get done in a certain amount of time, or how long a certain amount of work will take you. And this is cheap, if not completely free. To do, right? I don't need a team of developers estimating things. I just need a way to model out that past data. It does rely on a couple things. We want data that looks like the past. That's going to help us forecast the future. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So why does this matter? Why does forecasting matter towards our goals from a scaling perspective? Well, I think the first thing is what we talked about at the beginning. When you look at the cost of planning, the cost of estimating, the effort that goes into trying to get everything perfect so that we have a highly accurate estimate, we're taking the team's time away from doing the work that delivers the value. My colleague at Pro Kanban, Pratik Singh, talks about this cycle a lot as almost doing machine learning on your team's data, right? So if we're delivering more value, if we're delivering more user stories, we're getting more things done, which is giving us more data to more accurately forecast, and it's delivering value at the same time. Instead of saying, stop working, stop delivering, come over here and estimate a bunch of work based on what we know right now, things that you might not even be working on for another 6 months. So if we focus on delivery, we're starting to get more data in about how much this team can do, and that's going to help us forecast more accurately. The next one here is back to our concept here of overhead, right? So they say that if you switch, context switching costs 20% of your efficiency on whatever you were doing in the first place. And even though we might have team WIP limits in place in terms of how much work the team is working on, we are asking them to switch gears constantly to come and either review user stories or story point user stories or help us refine acceptance criteria. So we're taking, again, their time away from doing work to come and help us refine things to make them more accurate so we can estimate. So instead of that, we want to shift our focus towards that forecast because it is a lightweight way to project how much work we can get done in a certain amount of time. The next one is adaptability. And so back to the airport example, there's so many great flow examples or bad flow examples at the airport. But if I go back to this concept of estimating, right, and getting to the airport at a certain time and boarding my flight and landing at a certain time, right? I'm doing all these things based off the plan going a certain way, and then I'm pissed when it doesn't. So think about this in the same way when we ask the team to estimate, right? They are spending a lot of time and energy coming up with this plan based off these estimates. And then how do they feel when it changes, right? And so we see this a lot where we become really attached to the estimates and we will do everything we possibly can to make sure that we stick to that estimate. We will change the scope. We will change, we'll move things around. We'll ask the team to stay late, right? So how do we start to think about our adaptability and our flexibility to be more anchored in how much we can get done by a certain amount of time without spending all of that upfront effort to review the work and understand it before we start. So how do we do this? I mentioned forecasting. And so if you missed our other webinar for Agile Velocity, check out the flow metrics for Scrum Teams one. We talked a little bit about this concept of a Monte Carlo simulation. What's really cool about running these Monte Carlo simulations is they work at every level of the org. So I can use throughput data for features for a certain program to say, how many features can this team deliver or this program area deliver in one PI, let's say, or how many features can we deliver for this program over the course of a year? And that's going to help me plan with much more accuracy than saying, we're just going to pull 5 new features in every PI because we have 5 teams that need work to do. So we're going to start to use historical data at that level, not only to help us figure out how much work can we do, but it also starts to figure out what's the right batch size for the work that's moving through this level of the org. And so I really love starting to play with Monte Carlo simulations at this level, because you can also start to look at average feature size, like how many stories are typically in our features, or 85% of our features have 20 stories or less. That's a good upper bound for us then, in saying we don't want features that are bigger than 20 stories, because that's going to hurt our ability to accurately forecast when they will be completed. That's probably a fun follow-up webinar at some point, or follow-up meetup. Yeah.
We actually had Daniel on about 2 years ago doing your project performs like a hurricane, forecasted like one. So we have that one. We actually have 3 different ones since 2020. So pretty much one a year that is about either no estimates and Monte Carlo simulation. So I put all 3 links in the chat.
Oh, awesome.
For all 3 of those.
That's great. Yeah. And I think I think we spend a lot of time talking about Monte Carlos at the team level, and I think they're amazing there and can help with more accurate sprint planning and a lot of other things. I think when you start scaling it up to features and epics, you get such an interesting view of the data at that level. When you start thinking about like batch size, and you start thinking and cycle time for things like that, we're getting more comfortable applying a lot of those flow metrics at the team level, but when we scale them up, the numbers are probably pretty sobering, maybe a little terrifying. We have a colleague at he's an Accenture coach, and he was telling us that he had a portfolio board, or a program level board, around Thanksgiving, and they had started putting turkeys on the features to show like which you put a turkey sticker on the feature if it had been in progress for a month. And then all these features started accumulating all these turkey stickers, and they started referring to them as the turkeys, because they were the features that were stuck on the board for too long. So, all right. So Leland, you said that this has been covered in the past. I won't go into too much detail about this here, but definitely check out the links that Leland shared. The Monte Carlo simulation is a way to simulate past data through random trials and figure out how many work items you might be able to complete for a given period of time, or if you have a fixed number of items to complete, a date range for when that item would be completed. The most important part, I think, is not so much the what or the when, it is the likelihood of achieving it. And so when we start to look at those percentile lines on the bell curve at the bottom here, it's helping us figure out how much risk are we comfortable accepting with the estimate that we are about to give. A lot of times when we talk about risk with estimates, we do things like pad them or buffer them, like I mentioned earlier. We're often basing the data that we're using for our estimates off of averages, which means we probably have a 50% chance of hitting them in the first place. But we also want to start to think about what risk level are we comfortable with as an organization. And what you can see in the red box there is, this is saying based on where this data modeled out, there's a 95% chance that your team will complete 25 or more items in the next 20 days. But you can also see, as you look to the right in that curve across the bottom there, the number of items increases as the likelihood decreases. And so I could say we could get 38 items or more done in the next 20 days, but there's a 50% chance. It's an interesting way to start to think about how we communicate risk to our stakeholders. And if I told you the difference, that's 13 more items, but a 50% chance of delivering them, what estimate would you want to use? What forecast would you feel comfortable using? So this helps us communicate more in terms of risk and what's our comfort, right, with accepting that risk or not accepting that risk through how we're forecasting. All right, number 3. So if you are a fan of whiskey and Agile, I would definitely recommend checking out the Drunk Agile podcast. with Dan Vicanti, who Leland mentioned, and Pratik Singh. They've got a new episode that just recently came out on time boxes, and it might be one of my favorite recent rants. But when we think about time boxes, and this is true on a couple different levels, it's another pattern in Agile, whether it's team level or scaled time boxes, that creates a bunch of kind of bad anti-patterns. And let's start with features, because this is the one I hear the most, right? So I mentioned, a lot of times we're planning new features before we've delivered the last one. And when I talk about that with a lot of organizations, what I typically am met with is, well, a feature should be time boxed to be 3 months or less, right? We say the same thing with user stories. User stories should be time boxed to 2 weeks or less. But what if they can't get done then? Or what if they are a lot smaller, right? So we end up starting to see at the feature level that we're building out features that should take 3 months, instead of saying, what's the smallest feature that we can create that's going to get something out into production and give us feedback sooner? So what we want to start to do is think about this continuous flow of work through our system. And I think time boxing at all different levels of the organization starts to really stifle that. When we think about quality, there's also some unintended side effects of these time boxes. A lot of times what we see with a time box is that it creates a bunch of pressure so that we work during the time box up until the end, and then we panic at the end to try to get something out the door. I started my career in IT in QA, and I got really, really good at ping pong, because 9 months out of the year, I was waiting for something to test. And at the very end of the projects, I would get delivered all of this stuff with a very short deadline to get it out the door. And time boxes at all levels of the organization tend to have an impact on the folks that are responsible for ensuring the quality, whether it's a QA role or the developers for that matter. The next one here is flexible delivery. If you work for an organization that has continuous delivery, like big kudos. What I see in a lot of scaling is that even when we have the means to do continuous delivery, it often gets taken away in favor of these time boxes. And so what we start to do is we say, oh, well, we have, we're going to do a 10-week PI. And at the end of the PI, we'll demo things that got done, and we'll do this big incremental delivery of all of the features that went out, and start to do it again for the next time box, right? But really, if we're focusing on flow, we want to make sure that we're giving every part of the organization, every level of the organization, that ability to deliver features when they're done and get feedback from the customer faster. There's a great article on Schrodinger's cat from, I'm going to totally draw a blank on the author's name, about value. I'll find it, Leland, and maybe we can post it in the show notes. But she talks in it. It's Julie Starling, and Julie's incredible. If you don't know Julie, find her, talk to her. She's brilliant. But she talks about basically this concept here of how everything we're working on is, we're assuming it's valuable, but we don't know that it's valuable until we deliver it, right? And so when you think about everything you're sitting on, from a work in progress perspective, even if it's done per your definition of done and not deployed, that is value that is not realized. And so we want to start to strip away these time boxes so that work is going straight to the customers as soon as it can. And we're getting that feedback sooner, and we're finding out if it's valuable sooner. And then the last one here is around better alignment. So getting rid of these time boxes is going to give us, again, more flexibility with how we deliver, what we deliver, and hopefully help create better customer loyalty and competitive advantage for our businesses. That flexibility around pulling work in and delivering it when it's ready, instead of in these rigid time boxes, helps us build up that flow muscle. All right, so how do we focus on flow over time boxes? I mentioned the turkeys. I love that example. You'll have it in your head now, especially going into the Thanksgiving holiday. But how do we do this? Like, it's easy for me to just say flow, focus on flow, find your flow state, flow over time box. But what does that actually mean? When we think about flow, what we want to start to look at is work item age. And at a feature level and an epic level, like I said, that can be a very sobering number. So if you were about to do planning in an organization and you saw that some of the features that you had in progress had been in progress for the last 6 months, what would you do? Would you still have a planning session? You might have a different conversation, right? And so what we want to start to do is to make the age of our work items, the feature or epic or initiative, whatever levels you've got in your company, you want to start to make that visible so that we start to manage getting that work done sooner. And I think a lot of times when we start looking higher up in an organization, features, epics, whatever, like I said, whatever your nomenclature is, when we start to look at those other levels of work, I think we become more married to making sure we get them done, even if they aren't valuable anymore. And so I think it can be an interesting conversation when we start looking at how old a feature is to say, are we going to keep working on this? Like maybe this feature's been in progress for 4 months and it was something that we needed to have out after the first. Should we keep working on it? Do we want to keep investing in this? Do we want to just call it good and get it out the door and not continue to iterate on it? Those are all conversations that are hard for us to have if we can't see how long it's been in progress, right? Such a simple measure. Most tools out there suck at this, especially as you look at the bigger work items. And so I typically recommend just put the date that we started on a feature or an epic at the beginning of that description so we can see it on our, on our program or portfolio level Kanban and start to have a conversation on a regular basis around how old is this, right? It's going to drive different action, different conversations, and help bring our focus to getting those things done rather than focusing on the time box. All right. So let's go back to the beginning. Why were we doing all this? Why are we making our lives so hard? Why are we scaling? If these are all the things that we're trying to get better at, efficiency, time to market, higher quality, reducing risk, getting better alignment, and having transparency and visibility into the work at all levels of the org, I think these are the things that have to change first. So pull over plan, forecast over estimates, and flow over time boxes are all the things that are going to start to give you the ability to deliver on what's on that slide before this. So it's going to give us more responsiveness. It's going to give us more value sooner. And honestly, those are all the things that Agile's supposed to do. So those are the practices that we actually want to scale to be more adaptable and more efficient. I highly recommend checking out the scaled classes through Portfolio Kanban, and my brilliant friend Pratik just came out with his book just launched this past week. It is called Simplified Scaling. Scaling Simplified. It can be found on Amazon or on LeanPub if you prefer online reader. And definitely check out that Drunk Agile episode and others on YouTube. You'll also get a chance to meet Pratik's beautiful German Shepherd, Nisha. And if you're interested in learning more about some of the flow metrics I mentioned here, we do have an Agile Velocity applying a public flow metrics for Scrum workshop coming up at the beginning of the year. And in that class, we go through and talk quite a bit about how to gather these metrics and use these metrics to drive action for Scrum teams. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has questions or other conversation items we want to open up. Randy.
I'm going to ask a question I normally ask, and I'm going to ask it in a backwards way, I guess. What things, if not true in an organization, are most likely to disrupt any or all of the things you just covered? And I'll plant a potential seed.
Okay.
One thing I see a lot is the way large organizations deal with contract labor.
So at the developer level, like team level contract labor?
Yeah, like they've got these massive programs in place and they've got contracts with a big provider that the way the contract is written, it's, I need X horsepower of skill A and Y horsepower of skill B.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that locks some of these patterns in around planning and estimating and time boxing is archaic ways of budgeting. And that translates down to some of what you're talking about, I think, too. And I think when we start to pull back to this more flow-based approach, it requires a shift in how you budget, more off run rate than off project budget or timeline or deliverable, right? Because when we start to look at some of those things you talked about, like contracts and some of those things where we're trying to figure out how much is somebody going to cost and when is this project going to be done where they can roll off and I don't need them anymore.
Yeah.
That's going to back us into having to plan, having to estimate, and having a time box. As soon as we start to look at things more run rate based off of like, for this area, this is the run rate for work to move into this area. You can still start to get some idea of cost based off of your cycle time data and that run rate. And then we're hopefully starting to inch away from project-based cost. I don't know if that helps though. So that's one. You talked about, so what has to not be true? You said,
what things, if not true, will blow up the things you're talking about?
I think going back to the bureaucracy one we talked about at the beginning, right there, I think we see this a lot of organizations that are saying, okay, from the top down, this has to be by the book, right? We're rolling this out. It has to be by the book. And so there's not a lot of flexibility in approach or challenging some of the thinking around things like this. And I think that, I mean, that's a showstopper right there. If you're looking for a silver bullet or you're looking for a formula to scale, not having some of these things may feel like you're giving up some of that control or some of that rigor. But I think in the end, if you're trying to get to more value, more high quality value to customers sooner, it comes back to what is your goal?
Yeah. So things like performance measures, because if you have like a whole team of people who are measured on these certain things that are not aligned with the things that you just covered, then they're going to keep trying to drive things to work that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Randy, I would have to agree 100% on what you said. It's a lack of alignment, a lack of structure. One of the things that I got involved with in a number of projects is basically identifying the fact that you don't have to go big bang. One of the things you need to do is you need to look at your value flows. Okay, what are the things that you do that make money? And essentially align them, align business and IT with that. This way you can go ahead and get away from, okay, I'm right because I'm at this high level, but I don't know squat. You've got people that have a vested interest in it. On top of that, for once and for all, we can actually show the value that the business has reaped from that. Say, by customer satisfaction, increase the customer satisfaction, reduction of deliveries, delivery times and stuff like that. It needs to be tied back to the business, and the business needs to be tied very tightly with IT in its specific value stream. Because the other thing I've seen that worked very well as a result of that is other value streams getting very upset because this value stream is looking really good. We're getting a lot of press, and they're looking at people in that value stream as, this is my competition. And so I've seen it where, people start saying, hey, well, let's go ahead and do that. The other thing is, any mistakes you make, any investigations you need to do are on a much smaller scale. So it can be done efficiently and won't take as much time. And I can tell you that worked because Nordstrom did that.
Yeah.
Several years ago.
Yeah, with that was their innovation labs, right?
I'm not sure, but I do know the person that headed up ended up becoming a VP there.
Awesome. Any other questions or comments about scaling? Got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I've got a question. Hi, Colleen.
Hey.
You talked about eliminating time boxing. Early on in the conversation, you talked about the need to unlearn. And I've found that time boxing, having people work in sprints, is actually essential to getting them to unlearn the idea of delivering everything all at once in the end and delivering iteratively so they can get fast feedback. You know, comment on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the key to achieving getting rid of time boxes comes from limiting WIP and focusing on work item age. And those two things together help start to chip away at that. So, you know, I think even we were talking about the cost of planning earlier, but if you think about the cost of getting to 0 at the end of each sprint, that's also a really expensive exercise, and why I think we often see the team start everything and then finish everything at the end. I know some of the new coaching from the Scrum Guide says you don't have to do that. You can work in a continuous flow. I haven't seen a lot of Scrum teams yet get there. I wish that was the reality of it. And those events were more just check-ins than getting to sprint, you know, getting to inbox 0 to replan and to close out the sprint. But if you think about it, in some ways, when you start to think about your cycle time data, and from a Kanban perspective, we use the term service level expectation, right? So if I'm able to look at my cycle time data, let's say at a feature story level or feature level, and say 85% of my user stories are delivered in 7 days or less. Let's say that's the number we're going to use, which would be a fantastic number for 85% of our user stories. So let's say it says 7 days or less. What we want to start to do is manage our work in progress against that number. So if I'm limiting my WIP, and let's say this team has a board WIP of 10. As a team at stand-ups, I want to start to look to say, is there anything on this board that's approaching 7 days? Because 85% of our work, we're trying to manage to 7 days or less. Maybe we're saying we acknowledge that 15% of the time we'll have stories that exceed 7 days. That SLE starts to create that same constraint that you're talking about that a sprint gives you, but at an individual work item level. And I would argue that in a lot of ways, that gives the team more control to take action than to try to get everything done in the sprint time box, because now we're starting to manage things that are explicitly aging, and we're doing it based on the team's past performance data instead of the arbitrary 2-week window.
So then the unlearning, the retraining comes from the limiting WIP rather than having a sprint time box. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. WIP
Awesome.
and that concept of the service level expectation, or managing, you know, you're managing the work on your board against how old it is.
Got it.
Both of those together. Yeah.
All right. I think we're right at time. So thank you, Colleen.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so the recording will go up on the Agile Austin YouTube channel. We'll get the deck from you and make it where it's available as well. And I will put the notes. There's a little bit of chat out there as well. So, you know, with different links to the direct, you know, the 3 previous ones we've had about, you know, no estimates, the drunk Agile, actual thread. So different links in there, even the article on the Schrodinger's work item and the cat in the box. Yeah, so all of that's out there. So we'll make sure that's all posted, at least in the meetup in the comment section where you can find them as well.
Awesome. Thanks again for having me, and thanks for joining, everyone.